Billionaire Daniel Rosewood owned 12 luxury cars, but he disguised as a poor delivery guy to find true love. Before we dive into this emotional story, where in the world are you watching from? Subscribe and turn on notification to see more tales like this. Daniel's wealth had become his prison. Every room he entered fell silent. Conversations died mid-sentence when people recognized his face. Laughter stopped. Eyes lit up with calculation instead of warmth. He watched as genuine smiles transformed into practiced grins, as casual chats became careful pitches for money, favors, or connections. The loneliness cut deeper than any business loss ever could. His romantic life read like a series of expensive disasters. Rebecca, the socialite with perfect makeup and empty eyes, cared more about planning charity events with his money than spending quiet evenings together. She loved the spotlight his wealth provided but yawned through every personal conversation they attempted. Victoria, the stunning model, lived for expensive restaurant photos and designer shopping trips. She posed beautifully beside him at every public event but had nothing to say when the cameras disappeared. Their relationship existed only in flashbulbs and social media posts. Then came Patricia, the worst betrayal of all. The daughter of a business rival, she actually asked him to buy her father's failing company as a wedding gift during their third date. When he hesitated, she laughed and said it would be pocket-changed for someone like him. The final blow came at his brother's wedding reception. While families celebrated around him, Daniel overheard Patricia on the phone in the hallway. Her voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "He's boring as hell, but $8 billion makes anyone charming. I can tolerate his personality for that kind of money." Daniel stood frozen, watching genuine couples dance through the doorway. Real laughter filled the air. These people celebrated love without contracts, without calculations, without wondering if their partner loved them or their bank account. His fortune was a fortress, impenetrable, isolating. That night, staring at his city from his penthouse window, Daniel made a decision that would change everything. If money was the problem, then money had to disappear. If wealth was the wall between him and real love, then he would tear down that wall completely. The plan was dangerous. The risk was enormous. But watching those couples dance with pure joy had shown him something he'd forgotten existed: love without conditions, connection without calculations, relationships built on hearts instead of bank statements. He was about to find out if such love could exist for him. The transformation took 3 months to execute. Daniel worked with Miguel, his most trusted assistant, to create the perfect cover story. Business reporters received carefully leaked rumors about his sudden need for a health sabbatical. Board meetings were restructured around his absence. His public appearances simply stopped. While the business world buzzed with speculation about his mysterious departure, Daniel was busy becoming someone else entirely. The apartment in Riverside Heights cost more per month than he used to spend on lunch. Paper-thin walls meant he heard every argument, every crying baby, every late-night TV show from his neighbors. The heater worked when it felt like it. The shower had 2 temperatures, freezing or scalding. For a man who owned penthouses in 3 cities, this tiny space felt like living in a matchbox. But it was perfect. Nobody here knew his face or his fortune. He was just another guy trying to make rent. His first day at Metro Delivery Services nearly broke him. The uniform scratched against his skin. The other drivers looked at him with suspicion, sizing up the soft-handed newcomer who clearly didn't belong. They whispered jokes about the pretty boy who probably wouldn't last a week. They weren't wrong to doubt him. By noon, blisters covered his palms from gripping packages. His back screamed from loading trucks. His feet burned from walking endless flights of stairs. Sweat soaked through his shirt as he stumbled through neighborhoods he'd only seen from highway overpasses. The work was brutal, relentless, and humbling. The real shock came during his first grocery run. Standing in the checkout line, Daniel calculated every purchase twice. Generic cereal instead of name brand. Store milk instead of organic. He put back the fancy coffee and grabbed the cheapest option available. The total still made him wince. Not because he couldn't afford it, but because he finally understood what every dollar counts actually meant. His neighbors worked 2 jobs to pay rent. Single mothers stretched paychecks to cover school supplies. Elderly couples chose between medication and groceries. This wasn't poverty tourism for them, this was survival. One slip-up, and his entire experiment would collapse. A careless word about his real life, an accidental mention of his business, even buying something too expensive could expose everything. The danger was constant. The stakes were everything. But for the first time in years, Daniel felt truly alive. The education began in grocery store aisles. Daniel learned that generic cereal tasted exactly like the name brand but cost half the price. He discovered that fixing a broken lamp with electrical tape worked just as well as buying a new one. When his shoes wore thin, he bought insoles instead of replacing them. These weren't life hacks, they were survival skills his privileged upbringing had never taught him. Saturday afternoons revealed hidden treasures. Free concerts in Riverside Park drew families with homemade picnics and genuine smiles. The community center offered movie nights where children cheered at animated heroes while parents shared popcorn and stories. Daniel found himself laughing harder at these simple gatherings than at any expensive entertainment he'd ever attended. The library became his sanctuary. Book clubs met every Thursday, discussing novels with passion that put his business meetings to shame. Nobody cared about quarterly reports or stock prices. They cared about characters, emotions, and stories that moved them. His relationships with customers evolved beyond simple transactions. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman on Oak Street, always struggled with her grocery bags. Daniel started carrying them to her door without being asked. She thanked him with homemade cookies and stories about her grandchildren in college. Mr. Rodriguez, a disabled veteran, needed help reaching his medication deliveries. Daniel made sure to knock gently and wait patiently while the man made his way to the door. Their brief conversations about baseball and weather became the highlight of both their days. These moments cost nothing but meant everything. His co-workers slowly accepted him as the weeks passed. Tommy, a driver with 20 years of experience, stopped making jokes about Daniel's soft hands once he saw the blisters and calluses forming. Maria, a single mother working 2 jobs, shared her lunch when Daniel forgot to bring one. They judged him on his willingness to help, his reliability, and his ability to laugh at himself when he made mistakes. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel felt genuine friendship without hidden agendas. Family dinners became elaborate performances. Every month, he slipped back into his old world for a few hours, carefully explaining his mysterious consulting work while dodging questions about his obvious exhaustion and sun-weathered hands. His mother worried about his weight loss. His father questioned his career choices. His brother joked about his newfound humility. Daniel smiled and deflected, protecting his secret while marveling at how foreign his old life felt. The contrast was jarring. One day he discussed million-dollar deals, the next he celebrated finding a $20 bill in his uniform pocket. The real revelation came during a delivery to Lincoln Elementary. A teacher had ordered art supplies with her own money because the school budget couldn't cover them. Daniel watched 6-year-old students explode with joy over $10 boxes of crayons and construction paper. Their excitement over simple gifts felt richer than any boardroom win he'd ever experienced. Children's joy over $10 toys held more value than contracts worth millions. A grandmother's smile after he helped with her groceries meant more than any business handshake. The satisfaction of earning his paycheck through honest work outweighed every inherited advantage he'd ever taken for granted. Daniel was discovering that the life he'd been missing wasn't about finding someone to love him. It was about learning to love himself. Tuesday morning brought the kind of rain that soaked through everything. Daniel's uniform clung to his skin as he struggled with 3 heavy boxes of art supplies outside Pine Street Elementary. The cardboard was getting soggy. His grip kept slipping. Water dripped from his hair into his eyes, making it impossible to see clearly. He was losing the battle against both gravity and weather. "Let me help." The voice came from nowhere. Suddenly, an umbrella appeared over his head, blocking the worst of the downpour. Warm hands reached for one of the boxes before he could protest. "You're going to drop everything if we don't get these inside," she said with a laugh that somehow made the grey morning feel brighter. Daniel looked up and forgot about the rain entirely. She had dark hair escaping from a messy bun, kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, and paint stains on her cardigan that told stories of creative chaos. Her smile was genuine, no calculation, no hidden agenda, just pure human kindness offered to a stranger struggling in the rain. "I'm Elena Martinez," she said, balancing a box against her hip while holding the umbrella steady. "These are for my classroom. Thank you for getting them here safely." Daniel managed to find his voice. "Just doing my job." "In weather like this?" That's dedication beyond any job description. As they hurried toward the school entrance, Elena chatted easily about her students, the art project they were planning, and how she'd saved for months to buy these supplies. No complaint about the school's tight budget, no bitterness about spending her own money, just excitement about what her kids would create. Her smile cut through the rain and his cynicism. Inside the warm school hallway, Daniel helped her organize the supplies while she talked about her third-grade class. 26 students who came from families struggling to afford basic school supplies, yet they approached every lesson with enthusiasm and hope. "They see possibilities in everything," Elena said, opening a box of crayons. Yesterday, Maria drew her family's apartment and called it a castle. "That's the kind of magic I want to encourage." Daniel found himself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in months. When their eyes met across the scattered art supplies, something shifted. Something real. Something that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the connection he'd been searching for. Comment of Elena, "If you know she's the one." Their relationship grew slowly, naturally, like flowers pushing through concrete. Elena waited for the same bus Daniel took after his delivery shifts. They shared stories during the 20-minute ride across town, her voice mixing with the rumble of wheels and distant traffic. She talked about her students with the kind of passion Daniel had once reserved for quarterly earnings. He found himself looking forward to these conversations more than any board meeting he'd ever attended. Their first real date happened by accident. Elena's kitchen faucet had been dripping for weeks, driving her crazy during late-night grading sessions. When she mentioned it casually, Daniel offered to take a look. "You know about plumbing?" she asked, genuinely surprised. Daniel almost laughed. He'd learned more about repairs in 6 months than in 32 years of wealth. "I've picked up a few things." He spent Saturday afternoon under her sink, wrestling with old pipes and stubborn bolts while she made coffee and graded math tests at her kitchen table. When he finally stopped the leak, Elena's smile made every scraped knuckle worth it. Elena's apartment told her story in ways his penthouse never could. Mismatched furniture she'd found at thrift stores and refinished herself. Bookshelves built from boards and cinder blocks, packed with novels and teaching guides. Student artwork covered her refrigerator like badges of honor. Everything had purpose. Nothing was wasted. The small space felt warmer and more alive than his 1,000-square-foot penthouse ever had. She cooked dinner on a 2-burner stove while he sat at her tiny table, listening to stories about third-graders who saw magic in everyday moments. No expensive restaurants, no designer menus, just Elena's homemade pasta and conversation that made him forget the world outside her walls. The guilt started small but grew heavier with each passing week. Every time Elena mentioned money worries, choosing between new shoes or school supplies, skipping lunch to save a few dollars, working weekend tutoring jobs to help her aging father with medical bills, Daniel felt his deception like a knife in his chest. She supported her father in a nursing home across town, visiting every Sunday with homemade meals and patience that humbled Daniel completely. The man had worked construction for 40 years, his body broken by honest labor, his mind sharp despite his failing health. "He taught me that character matters more than cash," Elena said during one of their visits. "People with money come and go, but people with integrity stay." Daniel nodded and smiled while his secret burned through him like acid. No hidden agendas lived in Elena's world. She didn't ask about his career beyond polite interest. She didn't hint about expensive gifts or fancy vacations. When she touched his calloused hands, she saw evidence of hard work, not opportunities for financial gain. Her authenticity was both blessing and curse. She loved the man she thought he was. A delivery driver who helped elderly customers, who fixed her sink without expecting anything in return, who listened to her dreams without calculating their monetary value. But that man was built on lies. 3 months into their relationship, Elena whispered, "I love you," during a Sunday picnic in Riverside Park. The words should have filled Daniel with joy. Instead, they felt like judgment. Every "I love you" felt like a lie he couldn't afford to tell yet couldn't bear to lose. Daniel loved her quiet strength, her dedication to students who would never make her rich, her ability to find happiness in simple moments. But would she love him if she knew the truth? Would her feelings survive learning that the humble delivery driver was actually the billionaire who represented everything she seemed to distrust about wealth and privilege? The question haunted every kiss, every shared laugh, every moment of happiness they built together. Their love was growing stronger every day. And that terrified him more than any business deal ever had. The call came at 2 in the morning. Elena's voice shook through the phone, barely holding together as she explained that her father had collapsed at the nursing home. Heart attack. Emergency surgery. The doctors were doing everything they could, but the bills were already piling up beyond what insurance would cover. Daniel threw on his clothes and raced to the hospital, finding Elena in the waiting room with red eyes and trembling hands. "I don't know what to do," she whispered against his shoulder. "The surgery alone costs more than I make in 6 months. Even if he recovers, the rehab, the medications. I can't afford any of it." For the next 48 hours, Daniel watched the woman he loved slowly break apart. Elena hadn't slept, had barely eaten, and kept calling her bank to see if there was any way to increase her credit limit. She'd already applied for every loan possible. Her teacher's salary and weekend tutoring jobs weren't enough to convince any lender to help. "They want to transfer him to a state facility," she said, staring at paperwork she couldn't afford to sign. "The care there is, it's not what he deserves. Not after everything he's done for me." Daniel felt his heart splitting in 2 directions. One path led to revealing everything, his real identity, his billions, his ability to pay these bills without even checking his balance. Her father would get the best care money could buy. Elena would never worry about money again. But that path also led to losing her forever. The other path meant watching the man who raised the woman he loved slowly fade away in a place that couldn't provide proper care. It meant watching Elena destroy herself trying to save someone she couldn't afford to help. Daniel made his choice. "I have some money saved," he said quietly, pulling out his phone to check his delivery driver bank account. About $8,000. Night shifts, overtime, tips. I was saving for something else. But your father needs it more. Elena's eyes went wide. Daniel, no. That's your future you're talking about. You can't just give that away. It's not giving it away. It's a loan. Pay me back when you can. The tears came then. Not tears of relief about the money, but tears of shock at his sacrifice. Elena knew what $8,000 meant to someone living paycheck to paycheck. She knew he'd worked brutal night shifts and given up everything comfortable to save that money. "You worked night shifts for this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Double shifts on weekends. I watched you come home exhausted, barely able to stand. How can I ever repay you?" Daniel pulled her close, feeling the weight of his deception heavier than ever before. "You don't need to repay anything. This is what people do for each other." The money covered the immediate crisis. Elena's father got the surgery he needed, the medication that would keep him stable, and the rehab that would help him walk again. Elena threw herself into his recovery with the same dedication she brought to everything else. But something had changed between them. Elena looked at Daniel differently now. Not with suspicion, but with a kind of wonder that made his guilt burn even brighter. She saw his sacrifice as proof of his love, evidence of his character, a demonstration of values that matched her own. She had no idea she was falling in love with a lie. Daniel knew the truth was coming. Every day brought new risks, new chances for his secret to surface. Elena was talking about introducing him to her extended family, about making plans for the future, about building a life together. This was the moment truth would destroy them both. He had two choices: confess everything and lose the only real love he'd ever known, or keep lying and lose himself completely. Subscribe now. You won't believe what happens next. 2 weeks after her father's surgery, Daniel couldn't carry the weight anymore. They sat in the hospital cafeteria, sharing coffee and watching Elena's father take his first steps during physical therapy through the window. The sight should have filled Daniel with joy. Instead, it felt like watching his own execution. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you." She looked up from her coffee, immediately sensing the change in his voice. "What is it?" "My name isn't Dan Porter." The words came out like broken glass. "It's Daniel Rosewood." Elena's face went blank. Not shocked, not angry, just completely still. The silence stretched between them like a canyon neither could cross. "Rosewood," she repeated slowly. "As in Rosewood Industries. The tech company." Daniel nodded, unable to speak. "The billionaire who disappeared 6 months ago for health reasons." Another nod. Elena set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. "You've been lying to me this entire time." "I never meant for it to go this far," Daniel said, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "I was trying to find someone who could love me for who I really am, not what I own. Every relationship I'd ever had was about money, and I thought if I could just..." "Stop." Elena's voice was quiet but firm. "Just stop talking for a minute." She stared at him across the small table, and Daniel prepared for the explosion. The anger. The betrayal. The end of everything that mattered to him. Instead, Elena started laughing. "You want to know something funny?" she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "I've known for weeks." Daniel's world tilted sideways. "What?" "That what you wear. You think it looks cheap, but it's a paycheck, Philippe. My father worked construction for 40 years, he knows expensive things when he sees them. He spotted it during one of your visits and looked it up later. $20,000 watch, minimum. Daniel looked down at his wrist in shock. He'd worn it every day without thinking, a piece of his old life he'd forgotten to remove. Why didn't you say anything? Elena leaned forward, her eyes serious now. Because the man I fell in love with carried art supplies through the rain for kids he'd never met. The man I love fixed my sink without asking for anything in return. The man I love gave up his savings to help my father, even though it meant working night shifts for months. She reached across the table and took his hands. Your bank account doesn't change who you are when nobody's watching. It doesn't change how you treat elderly customers or how you make me laugh after terrible days at school. But I lied to you, Daniel whispered. About everything. You lied about your name and your job. You never lied about your heart. Elena's voice was steady, certain. The question is, now that I know the truth, are you going to keep pretending to be someone else, or are you going to be the man I actually fell in love with? Daniel stared at her, realizing something that shook him to his core. She loved him despite the truth, not because of it. For the first time in his life, someone had seen through his disguise and chosen him anyway. 1 year later, Daniel stood at the altar in Riverside Park wearing a suit that cost less than his old lunch meetings. Elena walked toward him in a dress she'd found at a downtown shop, her smile brighter than any diamond he'd ever seen. Tommy from Metro Delivery served as his best man. Maria threw rice with Elena's third-grade students. Her father, steady on his feet again, beamed with pride as he placed Elena's hand in Daniel's. The guest list included delivery drivers, teachers, and children who drew pictures of the happy couple. No business partners, no social climbers, no photographers from fancy magazines. Just people who knew them as Dan and Elena, the couple who helped neighbors and shared lunches from brown paper bags. Within months, Pine Street Elementary began receiving mysterious donations. New art supplies appeared monthly. Field trip funds materialized from anonymous benefactors. The music program got new instruments. The library received hundreds of books. Elena suspected but never asked. Some acts of love work best in shadows. Daniel also quietly purchased Metro Delivery services, transforming it from the inside. Driver wages doubled. Health benefits appeared. Retirement plans emerged. The changes looked like company growth, not billionaire charity. His co-workers never knew their struggling delivery service had been saved by the guy who used to share their lunch table. Their tiny apartment became a sanctuary filled with student artwork and real laughter. Elena graded papers while Daniel planned delivery routes. They ate dinner on mismatched plates and watched movies on their second-hand couch. No more gala photos where fake smiles hid empty relationships. No more designer gowns worn by women who loved his credit cards more than his character. Instead, Daniel came home to Elena's homemade cookies shared on their apartment floor, her paint-stained fingers intertwined with his work-calloused hands. His old life felt like a movie he'd watched about someone else. The penthouse sat empty while he found joy in a space smaller than his former closet. Board meetings happened without him while he discovered that helping Elena's students mattered more than moving millions. Daniel's family slowly understood. His mother stopped asking when he'd returned to real work. His brother admitted that marriage had taught Daniel what their father's money never could. Even the business world eventually forgot about the billionaire who vanished, too busy chasing profits to notice he'd found something infinitely more valuable. True love sees the person, not the price tag. Daniel had traded his fortune for authenticity and discovered that the richest man alive was the one loved for his heart instead of his bank account. Share this story if you believe in love without conditions. Subscribe and turn on notification to see more emotional videos like this.